Hello, everyone. We're live. Producer Sal's gonna post some questions. Thanks for coming. And I'll start answering. Cry Guy, debating between Drake London and Mark Andrews, full PPR flex. Who would you go with? In PPR, I believe this is pretty close. I currently have Drake London at 66 with an 11.3 projection in the flex rankings. Mark Andrews at 72. But we're talking about a 0.1 difference between the two, 11.3, 11.2 projection for each. I think in normal circumstances, I would be more confident with Andrews, but he has not produced much over the last few weeks, and just a little bit concerned that he's going to continue his swoon in scoring. Drake London does have pretty good usage with Kyle Pitts out 12 targets in week 13 against Pittsburgh. So that's the lean there with Drake London. Should I start Tua, Matt Ryan, or Taylor Heineke from Casre Lamont? Thank you for the question. I saw this question ahead of time, and my initial gut reaction is that Tua is, by far the best fantasy quarterback of those three. But the reason I think you're asking that is the matchup against Buffalo and the weather that's going on there. So I did look up the weather, and it's going to be snowing, 9.4 inches expected throughout the day. The hourly snow for tomorrow is about a half an inch per hour. And you're also looking at 10 or 11 miles per hour in wind. And I'm just trying to keep an eye on the total for that game because the lines and the totals will drive our projections at 4 for 4. And right now we're looking at an over-under still of 44 with an open of 44.5. So Vegas is not adjusting too much for the weather at this point. So I probably would go Tua, but I would keep an eye on that. If the weather continues to get worse and it's looking like blizzard conditions where they can't keep the field decent, and it looks like they're going to have to be run heavy as opposed to passing the ball, then I certainly would switch. And I think I would go to Matt Ryan, given the favorable matchup that he has in the Dome against Minnesota. I don't trust Matt Ryan, but there certainly is a path for him to have a good game against one of the league's worst pass defenses. Chris Fernandez asks, so Latavius Murray or Jeff Wilson if he plays, or Waller or Chris Moore in the flex. I'm not sure what scoring system this is. I can tell you that it's probably going to be Murray in half PPR. And I think if you get into the full PPR question, because Murray has a pretty good matchup, and we know he's going to get a certain number of touches. Arizona is 21st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. That's our signature strength of schedule metric at 4 for 4. So yes, in full PPR, I've got Chris Moore one spot ahead of Latavius Murray, but they're basically tied in the projections. I think Murray gives you a floor because it's easier to get touches to a running back than it is to a receiver. But as we saw last week, Chris Moore had a real good game against Dallas. He's got an even better matchup this week against Kansas City. I need to see if Brandon Cooks is going to be back. It doesn't look like Nico Collins is going to play. But last week, Moore had 10 for 124 on 11 targets against Dallas. So if both of those players, Cooks and Nico, are both out, then I think I would lean with Chris Moore. But if Cooks is back, then that might affect Chris Moore's outlook a little bit, but I still think he's a pretty strong play against Kansas City. Mike Yee, what's good, John? Half PPR. Please pick 2. White, which I'm assuming is Rashad White versus Cincy. Yes. Knight versus Detroit. Swift versus the Jets. Harris, if he plays, versus Vegas. So those guys are all going to be pretty tight, I think, in the rankings. Rashad White in half PPR, I have at 24. Knight, I have at 20. Swift is at 25. And Damian Harris is at 21. So they're all within like 5 or 6 spots. So I do have Zonovan Knight and Damian Harris the highest. Knight does not have a good matchup. Detroit is first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, but Knight's been pretty good. And I would suspect that they're going to go run heavier with Zach Wilson at quarterback. They tended to throw the ball more with Mike White at quarterback. Damian Harris, I would keep an eye on his status. If he's, he'll probably be questionable regardless. I did not see what his practice status was for today, but he was limited the last 2 days. He has the best matchup, 32nd adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. The Raiders are, so I feel pretty good about him. White's been solid. I think we've seen a nice floor from him over the last few weeks. He's been the starter, and then just the Bucs generally on offense have struggled. And the DeAndre Swift is the tricky one because he could get back to his 18 touches or whatever he had 2 weeks ago when he was off of the injury report. I believe he's off the injury report this week, but the Jets are still a bad matchup, so I'm not confident that he's going to see the sort of touches we need to see from him to start him over these other guys. Kevin CS, PPR pick 1, Mike Evans against the Bengals or Donovan Peoples-Jones against the Ravens. I would still go with Mike Evans. He's been in our breakout receiver model for a few weeks now. He had bad luck last week on a long touchdown that got called back due to a hold. So I would still go with Mike Evans. I understand the inclination to bench him after his poor performance. If you wanted to go with DPJ, that's not a terrible switch. I don't think you're crazy for wanting to start him, given his performance in recent weeks. And the Ravens are easier to throw on than they are to run on. So I would understand it, but I would still go with Mike Evans. Rob W, wide receiver issues, 1 point PPR. Keep running with Wilson. I assume that's Garrett Wilson, or pivot and risk Evans or London. I also need 2 running backs. Let's just start with the receiver question. I still think Garrett Wilson is probably the start of those 3. Evans would be my next choice if you wanted to pivot. Garrett Wilson was the top target for Zach Wilson when he was at quarterback, but he just, from a yardage standpoint, doesn't throw as many yards or touchdowns as Mike White would if he were playing. But I still think he's the number 1 target for this offense, and it's a good matchup. It's a great matchup against Detroit. But my other choice would be Evans if you wanted to go there. They're ranked fairly close in the rankings. Oh, go back to that last one, please. 2 running backs, Kamara. We'd go Kamara and Aaron Jones of those 4. Kamara with Mark Ingram out is a great start. He should see a ton of touches, and I think Jones is a really solid start against the Rams. Fun Guy 2000 asks, can I trust Antonio Gibson as my running back 2 this week? Well, I mean, this is kind of a philosophical question. Can you trust him? I don't have him ranked terribly high. I have him at 35 and half PPR. He's around guys like Cam Akers, Jerick McKinnon, Chuba Hubbard, AJ Dillon. I think he's going to be a part-time guy, but he's a few weeks removed from that injury. Maybe he gets back into his larger role that he had when he was really sharing it pretty 50-50 with Brian Robinson over, the last couple of weeks, though, last couple of games, Brian Robinson has been the primary back. It's a pretty good matchup against the Giants. They're pretty bad against the run. I don't know that you can trust him, but he's certainly a worthy flex play RB2 type in this game against the Giants. Do I go with Trevor or Rogers, and I need one to flex? Deontay, Gabe, Latavius, or Samaje Perine? Okay, full point PPR. I would go Trevor Lawrence over Aaron Rodgers, but they're pretty close. Rodgers has not been hasn't had the ceiling games this year, but he's been pretty consistent. And in those home games, he tends to throw at least 2 touchdowns. I think it's 8 of the last 9. He's thrown 2 touchdowns, something like that, if you look at his game logs from his home games at Lambeau. So I think he's a solid play, but Trevor Lawrence, I think, offers more upside against Dallas, even though Dallas is a tough matchup. Dallas is going to put up some points, and they're going to have to throw, whereas you wonder if the Packers are going to have to throw much with the Rams rolling Baker Mayfield out there. At receiver, and this is PPR, so let me pull up my PPR rankings here. I think it's Deontay, but I always like to check the rankings. He's at 50 in the flex rankings. Gabe Davis is at 77. Davius is at 55, and I think P. Ryan's not expecting a whole lot. Maybe, a handful of touches for him. So I think it's between Deontay and Latavius, and I guess this is a wide receiver running back question in the flex, and I think you're looking at floor with Latavius. You're guaranteed, 12 plus touches, whereas receivers tend to be have a higher ceiling and a lower floor. But I think Deontay is a pretty good play if either Mitch Trubisky or Mason Rudolph are at quarterback. He does not have a good rapport with Kenny Pickett. It looks like Pickett's going to be out with that concussion. So he probably is even, if it's Rudolph, I think it's probably even better for him than it is with Mitch. But Mitch is definitely an upgrade over Pickett as far as Deontay is concerned. I think Deontay is actually one of the best route runners in the league, and just having a really tough year given the state of this Pittsburgh passing game. There's just not many touchdowns to go around. But I think it's more optimistic on that front if Trubisky or Rudolph are starting. Kevin C. asked, need help for tight end and PPR. Pick one: Tyler Conklin, Darren Waller, Taysom Hill, or Hunter Henry. And I'm just going to retweet this link here real quick so that if anybody's missing or forgot about it. So I have them I don't have Waller in the rankings yet. I don't know how high I'd put him. It didn't sound like they were planning to activate him based on the last information I saw. If he does get activated, I don't know how high I'd have him ranked. I have Foster Moreau at 20 right now. I mean, it's a tough defense against New England, but they're 20th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. I'm not particularly optimistic about Moreau or just in general this entire passing game outside of Devontae. So him coming off of injury, and he just hasn't had the type of year that we're expecting from Darren Waller. So I think I'd probably avoid him. So amongst those other three, I think Hunter Henry is probably the best bet. It's pretty close with the projections between him and Tyler Conklin. Both have pretty good matchups. Hunter Henry is appealing to me because it looks like Jacoby Myers is going to miss another week of concussion. Devontae Parker is likely to miss another week or miss this week with a concussion, not get cleared in time. Last information I saw. So that leaves Kendrick Bourne, Nelson Aguilar, and probably Hunter Henry as the top three options in the passing game. And Hunter Henry might see 7, 8 targets against Vegas. Tyler Conklin is interesting because he did seem to do fairly well with Zach Wilson in terms of target share. I think he had a 2 touchdown game in that game, and he does have a nice matchup against Detroit. But I think it's down to those two. Taysom's okay against Atlanta, but in PPR, full PPR, I don't know that he's going to get the number of catches that he needs. But of all these guys, he probably has the most upside because we did see him have a 40-point game not too long ago. So if you really need upside, then he's probably got a decent floor with his rushing. As I mentioned, Mark Ingram is out. So they might use Hill as the backup running back there. He might see an extra couple carries. I probably would go Henry, but I think you could also go Conklin and Hill and not be in too much trouble if you wanted to chase the upside of somebody like Hill. Emilio Cabrera, I need 3 to start. By the way, I'm going to be doing another 14 minutes, top of the hour. So I'm about halfway through right now. I need 3 to start: McLaurin, Watson, Higgins, or Mike Williams. I assume need a boom this week. I'm going up against Kittle, McCaffrey, and Allen. I would just avoid the injured guy, which is Higgins. So I would start Terry McLaurin, Christian Watson, and Mike Williams. Higgins is too iffy for me to start. Okay, so I had the same kind of question, similar question. So it's hard for me to answer this right now. I guess tomorrow morning I'd have a better handle on the weather. I don't like. I don't trust Matt Ryan, but he is playing in perfect weather in the dome against a bad Vikings defense. So if you're sitting here and and I've only got the two like separated by a point, even though one's 12, QB 12 in the rankings, the other one's QB 18 or something like that. So it's not too far apart, and it would take not very much in terms of the total dropping for the Miami and Buffalo offensive scores to drop and projections to drop as a result. So if you're worried about this, then I think Ryan is solid. I probably would, Ryan and Huntley. I'm assuming you're not talking about Hundley, but Huntley. I think we're probably good for 250 yards and a touchdown from Matt Ryan. I think that at least we're going to get that. But he could provide more. He doesn't offer really anything as a runner, and that's the problem. And Minnesota gets beat deep, and he's not really doesn't have the arm anymore to beat him deep. So he just worries me a little bit. But these other guys worry me as well for the different reasons. Tua because of the weather, and Huntley. He's just really been pretty erratic in his starts. Just looking at this year, he has a couple of games, just not starts, but he got injured last week. He came in relief, had 187 yards, plus 41 yards rushing and a touchdown. Last year, looks like he had 4 starts, 219 yards with a pick, with 40 yards rushing for 10 fantasy points. Then he had against the Packers, he had 215 yards with 2 touchdowns, 73 yards rushing with 2 touchdowns. Just keep in mind the Packers are always surprised when running quarterbacks are running. Next start, they had against the Rams, 197 yards passing, 1 pick, 54 yards rushing, so 11 fantasy points. And then against Pittsburgh, 141 yards passing, 2 interceptions, 72 yards rushing. So he does have a rushing floor, but he doesn't really have a lot of passing to go along with it. So it worries me. If you're looking for a floor of 14, 15 points, you might want to go with Ryan in this group. Okay, we just got news that Aaron Wilson says that Brandon Cooks is not slated to play. So Chris Moore does look like a good start. DeAndre Swift or Gus Edwards, standard. Double check this. I think the answer is Swift, but I just want to be sure that I'm not contradicting the rankings. Yeah, Swift is a couple points ahead of Gus Edwards. Cautiously optimistic on Swift because he's not on the injury report this week. I don't know how well they'll be able to run it, but he should catch some passes um, against the Jets as well. I would go. I mean, Gus Edwards has the better matchup against Cleveland, but I think J.K. Dobbins is the lead back there in Baltimore right now. Michelle asks, "Hello, this is great. PPR flex. I need one of Aaron Jones, Bam Knight, Rashad White, or DeAndre Hopkins." All right, let's check those PPR flex rankings. I'm guessing it's probably Hopkins, but let me check. Hopkins, oh, it's actually Aaron Jones. Hopkins is at 14.8 in the projections. Aaron Jones is at 15.8. Knight comes in at 12.5 projection. Rashad White, I believe, is below him or right around him. 12.3 for Rashad White. So I would go Aaron Jones there. Hopkins has been the most targeted of the Arizona receivers with Colt McCoy, but it's a tough matchup against Denver. So I'm a little bit worried about that cornerback matchup. Probably get shadowed by Surtain, if I remember the matchups correctly. Yeah, pretty stingy secondary there for Denver. So go Jones at home in a game they're favored against the Rams. Pick 2 in PPR: Dobbins, McKinnon, Swift, Mostert, White, Perrine, Madison. Okay, let's just cross off Perrine and Madison since they're the backups. And I believe I'll just look at our running back PPR rankings. I think I know who it would be, but Dobbins is at 32, McKinnon's at 26, Swift is at 24, Mostert 29, and White at 22. So the top 2 in the rankings are Rashad White and DeAndre Swift. Relatively confident in both these guys in terms of a touch floor. And Swift's the wild card there. McKinnon's a pretty safe start as well against Houston, but yeah, it feels like chasing points a little bit after trying to start him after his 2 touchdown receptions last week. I think Mostert will have a healthy workload, but Buffalo's tough. They're 8th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. He'll probably see 15 carries, but I don't know how well they're going to be able to run against Buffalo. Eric asks, Swift, Stevenson, Kirk, Godwin, Pacheco, 1 running back, 1 wide receiver flex. Okay, I don't know if you can add the PPR or half PPR. That would help with this question. It varies pretty widely with running backs and receivers in the flex. I do have, I can tell you this, I have Pacheco at 13 among running backs in PPR. I think he's a great start against Houston. They're 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. He's been seeing a pretty consistent workload, so I think I would start him for sure. I don't think Ramondre Stevenson's going to play unless he was a surprise appearance at practice today. If maybe producer Sal could look at that, or somebody could put it in the chat. I didn't see anything with Stevenson. I don't think he's going to play. And then I have Godwin the highest amongst the receivers. I think he's probably the best play. So I think you're looking at Pacheco, Godwin, and then so then it's Swift or Kirk. I'll just give you a PPR answer. I think it's probably going to be Christian Kirk in that case. Yeah, Christian Kirk, 40 in the flex ranking, Swift at 58. So I hope that answers the question. Pacheco, Godwin. Oh, Stevenson returned to practice today, so we'll see what he's able with how they list him. If he plays, then I think he might be your third guy. Not sure where I would put him. He was top 5 last week against Arizona, but if Damian Harris is back, you're probably going to see him fall in that 10 to 15 range, coming off of the ankle injury and trying to play this week. It's a great matchup against against Vegas, but I don't know how much they're going to want to, load him up with work if he's got this ankle injury. Thank you for the update there, producer Sal. About 5 minutes left, guys and gals. Daniel Duong, thoughts about Cole Kmet now that Claypool is out? Bears should be down quite a bit, and Eagles have been decent with stopping the run with Saquon and Henry at 45 and 57 yards. Yeah, I'm I look at my rankings across the industry to see where I'm high or low on people just as a sanity check, and I'm pretty high on Kmet. I don't know why everybody's so low on him. If Claypool's out, you're looking at this really bad receiving core. Uh, Obviously, the Eagles are great on the perimeter against perimeter receivers. So, to throw the ball, they're going to be looking over the middle of the field, either to the slot or to the tight end Kmet. So I think he's likely to see, 8 targets, I would think, in this game. He'd have to. So I'm pretty optimistic about his upside this week. And we saw him catch, what was it? Yeah, 5 touchdowns in a 3-week span. Even just looking at the last couple of weeks, the usage has been there against the Jets. Really tough matchup against the Jets. 3 for 27 on 6 targets, and then against Green Bay, who often forgets that pass catching tight ends can catch passes. That he had 6 for 72 and 7 targets against Green Bay. So the usage has been there, especially over like the last 7 games of the season. It's been pretty good for Cole Kmet. ETN or J.K. Dobbins or Jacoby Myers on flex. Now, did Jacoby Myers come back to practice today? Maybe producer Sal can tell me. He's been out. He was limited on Wednesday, was out on Thursday, which looked to me like he was not going to be cleared in time. But if he is cleared, this will make it an interesting question. I don't know if this is PPR, though, or a half PPR. I think I have Jacoby return to practice as well. I did not see that either preparing for this. So yeah, Jacoby will probably slide in here, and if he's, we'll see if he's listed as questionable, and if he's through the concussion protocol. I don't know if he's going to play, but if he does play, good matchup against Vegas. It would have to be PPR, I think, to play him over ETN, and I would favor ETN over Dobbins at this point. Chip Cruncher, Evan Ingram, or Okonkwo. Good job spelling that correctly, by the way. You said full PPR. Yeah, I think I double check that. I have Ingram at 9. I have Okonkwo at 11. It's pretty close. They're separated by 0.2 points. Similar matchups. Dallas is 13th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. Okonkwo faces the Chargers. They're 16th. So nothing really, kind of the matchups are kind of a wash there. So I would go with Ingram. He had a huge game. Okonkwo had a good game too, but I think Ingram is probably the better play. Sheezy, half PPR. Who do I start? Diggs, Watson, Hopkins, or Williams? You have Pacheco in your flex. I don't know how the Pacheco thing is relevant. So you're just looking for one of these 4 to start, I think. I would go with Diggs. I would keep the eye on the weather. I think your next best start is probably Mike Williams. Christian Watson's tempting, but he might run out of good fortune here. But he also can score on one play. Well, so can Mike Williams. Half PPR. Let me check that. Let's see here. Receivers. I have Diggs at 5. Mike Williams at 14, DeAndre Hopkins at 15, and Christian Watson at 23 right now. I guess the weather might impact that Diggs projection, but Buffalo's used to throwing in the snow. Yeah, one more question, please. Bam Knight or Rashad White full PPR? full PPR. That's a good question because of the full versus the half PPR. As I mentioned, it seems like the Lions are a great matchup for Zonovan Knight, but they're not. Again, first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. I have him at 21. I have Rashad White at 22. It's very close, 0.2 points separating them. Since he is 18th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. So I think the question is, are you worried at all? If you're not worried at all about Leonard Fournette retaking the RB1 job, which it was 18-10 last week, and let's check Fournette's. I don't see Fournette in the injury report at all. So is he not even on the injury report this week? Yeah. So he's fully healthy now. So there's a chance that he might take some of White's touches. I don't think that's going to be the case, but I think we're a little more confident in Zonovan Knight's workload. And like I said, the Jets are more likely to run heavy with Zach Wilson at quarterback. All right. Thank you for all the questions. Appreciate you participating in this experiment, and we'll see you next time.